Hi, everyone. Good afternoon and good morning to those joining from the West Coast. This is the breakout session on standards-based leadership and governance. My name is Adam Edgerton. I recently graduated from the University of Pennsylvania and will be joining the Learning Policy Institute next month as a senior researcher. And I will be moderating this session along with my co-moderator, Meghan Comstock.
Hi, everyone. My name is Meghan Comstock. I'm a doctoral student in education policy at the University of Pennsylvania and a member of the CSAIL research team. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you all so much for being here.
And we'll briefly go over some logistics. Please make sure that your audio is muted. I think we've muted all attendees for the duration of the session. However, we would like this to be as interactive as possible given the constraints of this webinar. So please put questions as you think of them in the question box to your right. And Meghan will be reading those out loud as we go through. You don't have to wait until the end. We have some questions that we're going to pose to the panelists, but then hopefully it will become a little more free-form and interactive. Closed captioning is available. Please do not use the link in the slide. There is an updated link in your chat window if you would like to use closed captioning. We've also shared this link in the questions box and used the gear icon in the live captioning window to change the font size and more. And so we look forward to having everyone participate in this session. You'll also see the handout slide. There is a handout where we put together our relevant publications for this work. 3 of them that have been recently published deal with students with disabilities and teachers of students with disabilities who do not believe the standards are appropriate for their students when compared to general educators. Also qualitative work on how we might look at standards-based reform in a way that is politically sustainable. And finally, another survey paper that compares the attitudes among teachers, principals, and superintendents and how they experience these policies very differently from each other. But we're not going to talk about those publications today. I'm here to introduce our great panelists. And they are joining us from all around the country, and we're really excited to have this panel. Originally, we had invited them with an all expenses paid trip to Washington, D.C., and we're thankful that they're still joining us, even without that incentive. They represent a range of education nonprofits, higher education, and school districts from around the country. Our first panelist is Chad Aldeman, a senior associate partner from Bellwether Education Partners. We have Meredith Lowe, a principal from the School District of Philadelphia. Brent Malicote, who you saw in the last session, the assistant superintendent of the Sacramento County Office of Education. Jeff Pelzel, who's superintendent of the Newhall School District, which I had the privilege of visiting recently and was really impressed with the work that they're doing at Newhall. Bob Slavin, an esteemed professor and director of the Center for Research and Reform in Education at Johns Hopkins University, and Andrea Townsend, who's the director of Career Technology and Special Education in Greenville City Schools. And these panelists represent a range of not only administrative positions, but also rural, suburban, and urban districts, which is something that has been a major focus of the center's work. So without further ado, I'm going to mute my own webcam and show our 6 panelists. If you could please come online. Great. And so I'm going to pose the panelists a series of questions. Hopefully they will have follow-ups and the audience can pose follow-up questions as well in the question box. Our first question is going to be for Brent. And Brent, one of the things that we have been focusing on in the center's work is local control. And what does that mean exactly? It's something that we hear in interviews with superintendents and other officials all the time. But what does it mean to you, and what do you see of as its benefits and trade-offs?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for the question. It's great to be here with all of you. So I was thinking about this morning on the drive-in, and I think the idea with local control is that it's when ideas are not done or policy is not done to you or for you, but it's done with you. Feels like the real difference there. I think we've got a keen example that's happening in Sacramento County right now. I know that many across the country are shifting from putting out the COVID-19 fires in terms of distance learning and remote learning and virtual learning and all of those things that are happening, and are really starting to shift about planning and getting ready for the fall, which is no different here in Sacramento County. Where it's fairly clear in California that at best there'll be some kind of blended approach as we come back to school in the fall, where we'll have maybe cohorts of kids that are coming in out of schools, but that there will also be ongoing distance learning. And the idea of that, we as a county office of education decided that we would bring local experts all to the table. We have 13 districts in Sacramento County, ranging from the River Delta School District with between 200 and 300 students, all the way up to Elk Grove Unified School District with over 60,000 students, and we've got rural and urban and all the rest of it. And when I think of local context and really trying to pivot and be able to be flexible as we're thinking about planning for the fall, local context is probably, you couldn't get a better example of needing to really be able to address things based on need. And we're seeing that in Sacramento County. This process that we've gone through as we've pulled these local experts, and we have representatives from all 13 districts in our county, that we've come together to do a few things. One, to set a set of guiding principles that include things like quality instruction is the linchpin to success. Things like equity and access need to be a lens in all the decisions that we make. As well as a set of planning considerations that we've got broad agreement on across our district. And so what we've created is a document that, again, has not been built for people or to a group of school districts, but instead with that group of school districts. And I feel like we've landed in a really positive space, in a place that all of the districts really believe in what we're doing. But within this planning document that we're putting together, which is now I think about 16 or 17 pages long, we know that that each of the districts will have a slightly different approach to the way that they go about the fall, what school looks like in the fall. But there's all kinds of learning that's happening across these examples as well. So I mentioned River Delta with 200 to 300 students. We had a principal who was really talking about they've got campuses with over 20 acres with really small numbers of students, and they're really talking about using the outdoor space as a way to really think about social distancing. In a way that I don't think that some of our big districts had really gone down that road. They were going straight to master schedules, and they were going straight to some of those things that you might think about in terms of grouping students and AB schedules and Monday, Wednesday schedules for some kids and Tuesday, Thursday schedules for other kids. And that local control idea allowed for these districts to be able to collaborate in a way where small districts are really helping the big districts and vice versa. And so, again, I think that local control, we're seeing it in real time right now, the need for districts to be able to address local context based on the needs that they see with their communities. And I'll pause there.
That's great, Brent. That's a lot to work with. I'm wondering how other people feel about whether they agree or disagree with how Brent has operationalized local control. So I caught a lot about big districts helping small districts. We might imagine that happens at schools as well. But does anyone else have any other thoughts on local control and how they operationalize that?
So for me, I think when I think about local control, I think about it's like a classroom teacher differentiating based upon the needs of their students. And I think that's what we're talking about here. A district being able to differentiate based upon the needs of their community, the needs of their students, and really making those informed decisions based upon the data that they have rather than it being imposed. As Brent talked about, you make decisions based upon the path that you're headed on. And I think that empowers people to create ownership into the work that they're doing.
That's great. And Meredith, I'm wondering, as a principal, a lot of our surveys show that there's a disconnect between teachers and principals in terms of the amount of control they feel they have over instruction. Could you share some of your experiences and how that kind of fits in with this discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that I think Jeff is right on in talking about how we can bring people in to be partners in this. I think that nobody really likes things being done to them. And so I think when we can work with our teachers to talk about what success would look like and bring the research to the table, that's one thing that I talk about with my team pretty regularly. And here in Philly, we're in all kinds of different places with the standards based reform. I previously was a high school principal for youth and foster care, and we actually transitioned from regular kind of typical curriculum to a completely standards-based approach. The school I'm in right now does not have a standards-based approach, but we are trying to take steps towards that because that's something that I believe in. And I think that bringing the research to the table about how that can support student learning is really important. And then allowing teachers to be part of the process on that is crucial.
Great. Are there any other thoughts from the panelists before we move on to the next question? All right.
I might just add to the importance of really bringing in the community and the decision-making process. I think Jeff, he mentioned this as well, but the idea that student voice really matters in all of this. We're trying to organize as we're putting together this planning document for the fall. We're trying to organize a fishbowl activity where we bring local students from across the county together for adults to be, their role will be to just listen about what's working and what's not. Additionally, that you bring in parents and other community members to the table to really help define this idea of local control and to really provide that input that if it's absent, things just don't go as well. You can count, that's one thing that you can count on. If you're not bringing in that voice from students especially, but also families and community just more generally, you're just not going to be in as positive as a spot as you would be if you were just being really inclusive and thinking about that voice.
Great. And I'm wondering, I'm seeing a question in the box. How do you balance that buy-in and not being top down? But one of our questions asked from Eric Pollock, how does a leader ensure standards are being followed in every course and class? So that's often the tension in standards-based reform. Like somebody has to set them, and presumably someone is enforcing them. So how does a leader balance those competing tensions? I'm wondering if maybe Jeff, you could answer that, having seen it in Newhall myself.
Well, I mean, I think it's, you know, the reality is you gotta bring stakeholders in and engage them and partner with them and really, you know, voice, choice, opportunities to engage in that work. It takes time. I mean, I think that's one of the things too, is often we don't want to see things, or we don't allow things to be seen through because we go to implement something or to make change. And when we don't get the results in year one, we think we now need to have to abandon that. And the reality is it takes, and I talked about in the opening, you know, it's taken us in our work around mathematics instruction, we're in year 5 of this work, and we're still on the journey to continue to get better at that. So, but in all of that work, we've created best practices, and that best practices work wasn't the district office creating the best practices work. That was teachers coming together to say, this is what best practices look like around math instruction. It was vetted through literally every grade level teacher team. We developed the document and now we've shared it out. So I really think that the buy-in process is what's really critical, and bringing people to the table to engage in that work.
Great, great. Yeah, and I think, Jeff, I was really struck by your emphasis on how long it took and the amount of resources and dedicated professional development time and money. And even in thinking about, the effort to implement this and how there are really no shortcuts. I mean, that really came out in what you were saying, and that as soon as it becomes a fad, our teachers think of it as a fad, or there's a lot of turnover at the top, that buy-in is going to drop out.
Can I just add, Adam, too, real quick? I think, one of the things why it worked for us, I mentioned it earlier that we had a consultant who we brought in. Her skill set in terms of her ability to relate to the teachers was critical. They wanted to go there. They didn't want to miss out on the professional development because she was so good. And she had background. Interestingly enough, her teaching background is high school math, but we're an elementary only district. But she understands the standards and really could help press on our learning over time. And so I think that's a really important decision. I took the time to drive up to Visalia, 2.5 hours away, to see her in action, to see if she was the right fit for us. And then that's what made the decision. And so I think that, you've got to know your audience of teachers, and the type of personality when you work with someone does make a difference in professional development, especially when you're talking 3 and 4 full days of instruction over the course. So when we were done after four years of that work, some teachers had been with her 16 to 20 days, full days of instruction. That match is really important.
Yeah, that's really a lot of groundwork. And I think Meghan has a question she wants to pose from Susan Lucy.
Yeah, right. Susan Lucy posed this question about local control. So she makes the point that local control can mean that districts and schools have the ability to differentiate because of additional autonomy, but also that there could be more of a laissez-faire attitude about making sure that students' particular needs are met. So her question is, how can states do a better job of differentiating policymaking and supports based on district capacity and need?
And I'm wondering if maybe Andrea or Chad could jump in. Oh, Andrea, I think you're muted.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question for me? Just the last little bit there. I think I missed a crucial part. I don't want to speak unintelligently.
Yeah, how can states do a better job of differentiating policy and supports based on district needs?
I mean, I come from Ohio, and so in Ohio, the state does a lot for guiding the districts, and they use a lot of words that are like recommendations or guidance. And then locally, our control is sort of an elected position. So our control comes from our Board of Education, which are elected officials. And I think based on the size, you may have more or less board members. And so that brings a political game into it. And so I don't know if states can be helpful in strengthening some words beyond guidance or beyond recommendation. I know what ends up happening a lot of the time, especially a prime example would be the current virus situation, where we have guidance and we have recommendations, but really it becomes a political conversation as to what level of implementation we're going to take on at the local level, unless there's a stronger mandate or a stronger verb beyond recommend or provide guidance. And while I don't want to see us lose our autonomy, but I think there are certain situations, something like if you want to invest a bunch of money in standards-based education and then use words like we recommend or we'd like to offer you this guidance, and we know that the local control is going to prevent real implementation with fidelity of that, then I think that it might be time to get, either more state stronger language or some sort of buy-in in that respect, because it is it's a full gamut of feelings and input and perspectives, if you include your community, your guiding and governing board, your teachers, all to do things that we think really would impact student achievement. And then we find that when we don't do those things, that doesn't happen. And so I'm not sure if I've really answered your question, but I think that states, especially in Ohio. I'm not so familiar with other states, but in Ohio, we could really use a bit more guidance or stronger boundaries in areas where it really matters, and maybe take less of that strength or that authority when it doesn't matter as much.
Yeah.
That's how I would answer this question as well about local control. Is really about trying to vest the decisions that matter the most into the power that can handle it the most. I think a lot of times currently we put too much power into schools when oftentimes a district controls things like staffing and personnel and curriculum decisions. And to Andrea's point, sometimes states need to give more guidance on things like dealing with COVID school closures and what does a school day count like in the current environment. I think there aren't many states that have been very clear about what that guidance looks like or what counts. And I think that would have been instructive and helpful to the field about what that could look like. So again, it's a sort of balance between what's the right decision and what's the right level to make it. And there's a tension there. I don't think that any state has it quite right. But that's sort of how I would define local control, is trying to get that balance as correct as we can.
I just want to add one more point to that too, because I completely agree with Chad, but I think that we also need to have folks who are informed. When we're taking on local control, it really helps to keep everyone who's providing input into that decision informed, and informed in a relevant way, like a up-to-date way. So being informed or having been involved in education, we know it changes. And so always keeping up that balance between seeking input and providing information or providing updates as to what's guiding education these days, I do think helps some of that tension at the local control level.
Great. So I think since we've answered kind of question 2 already, we'll skip ahead to question 3. And stay with Andrea, and maybe we can bring in Bob as well, since Dr. Slavin has a lot of experience implementing Success for all around the country and internationally. And I'm wondering, how can we increase support among teachers for standards aligned instruction, especially for teachers of students on individualized education plans? So Andrea, you're a director of special education, and you could start us off talking about how do you build buy-in for standards when students have very different needs?
And I think, again, that's where I think this is an excellent question, because it really does talk about standards-based instruction and support to teachers, but it's really getting at the heart of, I think, one of the major barriers, which is buy-in, which is kind of our mindset, and that has a lot to do with our history, which was mentioned in the opening ceremony or the opening session. When you think about where we've come from in education and how we conceived education as being successful in the past and where we are now, they're vastly different, especially in this area. And so considering abilities of students beyond label is a really great place to start. So what we see a lot of times, especially I think in more rural areas, but that may not always be true, is that we have folks who really feel like students with individualized education plans, because they have a learning difference, they should have a lower expectation. And that's unfortunate, because we understand now the correlation between low expectation and low post secondary education outcomes is pretty connected. And so when we're saying we have low expectations for you, or you can't meet the standards that everyone else would meet, then you automatically will have less opportunity for avocation or an interest area of your choice in the future. And that's a pretty heavy decision to make. So I think we really need to start there. And I found it to be successful when we really take a look at longitudinal data for students and their outcomes, and when we take a look at students and their abilities sort of outside of an academic setting, so that we can really see students' strengths for what they are, and really build upon those strengths. So I think we really have to hit that mindset of students with disabilities are not able to meet those standards. We really have to tackle that and find the root cause of it. I suspect that's history or maybe a bit of bias, but we need to tackle those things and kind of grow past them together, so that we can really implement the standards standards-based instruction for all students and not just students in a general setting or in a specific setting.
And if I could just jump in to add, Andrea, I think that's right on. And I would also add that I think when we see teachers push back against something, it is often either because they're not completely clear on how to do it or because they don't believe that they can. And so when I have a 4th or 5th grade or a 6th grade teacher who is really kind of struggling or maybe using some negative language around a young person in their class because, oh, they're saying something like, oh, they're too low, which is not language that we support, but we're working on that. But let's just say that they say something like that. It's often because the child sitting in front of them is reading at a 2nd grade level and they're in 6th grade. And as a middle school ELA teacher, they don't know how to teach phonics. You know what I mean? Like they don't actually know how to bridge that gap. And so I think that a lot of the mindset issues that we see with teachers can be addressed by building their skill and building their toolbox so that what we're asking them to do doesn't feel so intimidating and they actually see a path towards helping that student achieve what we know they can achieve.
And I agree with that point wholeheartedly, but I also think that there's power in, or there's a lot of leverage in our intervention specialists who can partner with teachers and bring that skill to the table. And so, you know, a lot of what they talked about in that opening session about that collaboration piece, that time to plan piece, those you know, shared services kind of idea that, you know, hey, you may not as a 6th grade teacher know how to teach phonics, but I know an intervention that has proven effective. Let's share this time and see if we can't get more bang for our buck and see the improvement across everybody, even students who haven't yet been labeled with a disability but are reading at a lower grade level. And I think that that's the kind of conversation, those are the types of collaborative nature or that structure that we can put in place for both teachers in a general ed setting and intervention specialists or other support personnel, however that infrastructure is designed in your district. I think that that's a critical piece. And that sometimes is where I see some pushback is they don't know how to start those conversations and they don't know how to, you know, power through a problem, like a bit of an adversity or a disagreement among that team. And so I think that's another great place we could leverage support to those teachers.
I'd jump in here as well. We're really good at triangles and pyramids in education, and I think what happens many times is it comes back. Both Meredith and Andrea have talked about this idea of mindsets, but the idea that if you're looking at an MTSS pyramid and the foundation is something that's built for all, and then you've got some, and then you've got few. A lot of times, our students that have individualized education plans, they just get plopped in the tier 2 or the tier 3 without recognizing that they're first a tier 1 student. Like that's where we have to start. And we've got to look at things like, you know, UDL kinds of processes to make sure that our teachers are designing that first good instruction in a way that all students, including the student with the IEP, is getting the support that they need. They're getting the instruction that they need so that when then they are placed in that tier 2 or in that tier 3 part of the pyramid or the triangle, they've already got this foundation that sets them up for success. And I think that it becomes a mindset issue a lot of times where it's easy, it shouldn't be, but it happens where we place kids just automatically in that tier 2 or that tier 3 without first recognizing that they're a regular education student first, and we've got to meet their needs there.
And can I build on that too, is when you're doing professional development, you bring your special ed teachers with your gen ed teachers. I mean, when we rolled out all of this math instruction, our special ed teachers sat at the table with their teams and engaged in the work. When they have collaboration Fridays where they have PLC time, they're in with the general education teachers talking about the work that's going on, and you give them access to that curriculum, not something that's necessarily different, and then you help them differentiate. I also think you have to find areas where you can water the green spot. So you find those teams that are willing to do an inclusion model, and then you allow data never lies. And then when you find success and you find those models, then you build on it and you showcase it. You get teams of teachers to go in and observe and see what that looks like. And you just have to start, however small, it doesn't matter. You start and you water it and you water it and it grows and expands over time. But it just you have to be patient with that, and you have to provide them access and support over time. And I agree earlier what was talked about, in terms of, helping give them knowledge and support, because oftentimes we want to send kids out to get fixed. And that's just because we don't have the tools in our tool belt to fix the kids and support them. So people cannot lead what they don't know. They can't do what they don't know. So we have to do, that's our job, is to provide that kind of training and support for our classroom teachers.
Could I get in here for a moment? I want to take this conversation in a completely different direction. So if what's that?
Okay.
Sorry. I think the question is not the right question. The question is about how can we increase support among teachers for standards-aligned instruction? I would rather see a conversation about how can we increase support among teachers for proven instruction. The problem is, and frankly, this is what the CSAIL findings are telling us, among many, 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 many other bits of evidence, that standards alignment is not the goal. Standards are good. You have to have standards, and I'm not opposed to the current movement toward college and career ready standards. That's not what I'm talking about. But the idea that standards alignment in itself is going to be beneficial was not found in the FAST study. It was not found in the Intel study that was very much like it that came before. We did a big review recently of research on elementary mathematics instruction, and there were 9 studies that all had that basic idea that the way to improve mathematics outcomes was to provide coaching and extensive professional development, often massive professional development, to help the teachers understand mathematics and understand mathematics pedagogy and to align with standards. And not a single one of them, not one of those studies found positive impacts on student achievement. Despite enormous investments of time and money. Where there are another way of causing change, of bringing about change, is to find programs and practices that have been proven to be effective and helping teachers to implement those. Simply aligning with standards is not going to get us there, but if we have programs that have been evaluated and proven to be effective, then you can get, then that's the thing to invest the time and energy in. And then it becomes, I think, that then there's a different question about, that's very important that Andrea mentioned at the beginning. How do you get support for proven programs, not for alignment, but for proven programs? One of the things that we do in all of our programs, in Success for All and many other things, we help the teachers learn about the program that we're offering them. We hopefully get a delegation of teachers, parents, administrators to go and look at a school that's using the program, and they come back and they vote. And we require a vote of at least 75% of the teachers to take on a given program. So I think then that does a lot to help teachers realize that they had a role. They could have said no. They didn't have to do this, that they were truly, in authority, and that, they were willing to become educated and to make those decisions. And then getting to the question about teachers of students on individualized education plans, I think that once again, there's a lot of evidence about how to help children who are struggling. I'm talking about high incidence kids, kids with relatively mild disabilities. There's a lot of evidence about how to get those kids to be successful. First off, to not have to be in special education, to not have to have an IEP at all, because they can be served in the regular classroom or served with additional services. A lot of that evidence goes to various forms of tutoring, one to small group or one-to-one tutoring, which can be successful with paraprofessionals, with teaching assistants, as well as with teachers. Now, so if we're talking about ways of understanding things that have been proven to be effective many times, and then getting support for that, and then getting quality implementation of that, then you're talking serious business. But as long as you're only talking about standards alignment, then I think that we have loads of evidence that that's not going to get you there.
And Bob, I would agree with you. I think one of the missing components in my experience is the fact that school districts don't use a research-based instructional framework that has proven research around what does effective teaching look like. And there are frameworks out there that, when implemented through multiple research studies, we're using one right now, that shows that when implemented with fidelity, that opportunity gap, that achievement gap can be eliminated when teachers know the right teaching, the way to engage students, the way to differentiate, how to use the resources, how to assess and monitor the classroom environment and culture that's set up. And that's what will, I think, ultimately impact student achievement with the knowledge of those standards. I think you have to marry those two things to be able to get the results that you really want. You can't just do either in isolation. You can't just do a multi-tiered system type of initiative in response either. I think it has to all be joined together in order for you to really get down into the weeds of making that achievement happen for all kids in our school districts.
Right. No, I totally agree.
It's not just a program, you know what I mean? Because if it was a program, we would have already all adopted that program. But the reality is, I still don't think, I'm still in awe, 27 years into education, I'm still in awe that we don't know and haven't figured out, like, what's that effective teaching really looking like, and why are we still, why is it so slow in that process? And I think it's a lot of ongoing training, deep understanding, and then really using data and research to inform our instruction, which is what I have loved just in this conference so far. It's really research that's telling and driving what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Jeff. I want to leave time for audience questions. I also am dropping a link to, Dr. Slavin's, one of his most recent articles that I really enjoy on this topic on evidence-based reform, not just standards-based reform. And that's in the chat box if people are interested. And I'm going to turn it over to Meghan now to ask some of these. We have several audience questions we want to get to in the time we have remaining.
Sure, yeah, thank you. So the first question that came in a little while ago, and this is taking the conversation a little bit in a different direction, but is the idea that that standards-based reform, or that standards focus on English and math. And so the question is, what is leadership's role in ensuring a holistic approach to standards so that schools do not become top-heavy in English and math to the detriment of other subjects?
Right, so if we only, sorry, Meredith, go ahead.
Oh, that's fine. I was going to say that this is something that I think that we have really started to work on for our next school year, because I think that right now, I think that a lot of schools here in Philadelphia teach English and math and do not do a lot of teaching when it comes to science and social studies. And I don't say that as a judgment. I just say that as like, that's what's been prioritized and incentivized. And when we look at a lot of what our young people need to be successful in those subjects, they need a lot of knowledge building and they need a lot of content. And so one project that we are working through right now as a school team is doing backwards planning and unit planning for science and social studies next year in a way that provides cross-curricular connections and standards-aligned instruction in science and social studies, K-8, because our students really need that. And it's not that our students don't know how to make inferences or they don't it's not that they don't necessarily know how to use those skills, but they don't always have the content knowledge that they need to use them in an academic setting. And so using science and social studies as a vehicle to build that content knowledge is a huge opportunity, and one that we really need to capitalize on moving forward.
And I think at this particular moment, the phenomenon that we brought upon ourselves, we're paying the price for. We have not built scientific literacy in our population, and we are paying a price for that, because what's going on right now, you know, in the news every single day, as the discussion goes on about how to deal with the pandemic, you have people who have not the remotest idea how science operates, what kind levels of evidence are needed before things can be used on a grand scale, that not everybody's opinion is correct in science. Most people's opinions are wrong in science, and things have to be subjected to proof. And people are talking and making life decisions for themselves based on appalling levels of scientific literacy. And I think that, you know, we've spent the last 20, 30 years pushing math and reading alone, and doing as little as possible on the, you know, the fundamentals of not only, by the way, of science, but also of social studies, which has many concepts that I think are undermining our ability to take collective action. Something else that's right now a life or death skill. And you know, so and the worst of it is that with this, you know, focus for many years so much on math and reading, which I love math and reading. I'm not against it, but the inclusive focus, we're not making a huge difference on math and reading either. And that's you know, and that makes it that much more difficult to say, well, you know, science and social studies have to wait their turn, you know, while we deal with all this really heavy math and reading problem. Yes, those are key and they are extremely important, but there's more than that. And in our, you know, and beyond, you know, our current problem, to expect that we can have a modern economy and compete in the modern world and just give up on science? Really? Every other country doesn't think that way. I just don't understand why in America, particularly science, is a minor subject. Everywhere else, it's a huge deal. I just don't. Anyway, I'll leave it with that.
I'd jump in here too for maybe just a minute. It does feel like it could be another turning point right now. I do feel like I've seen in California, at least in Sacramento County, we're seeing schools that have made the shift, where there is a newfound focus around science, around history, social science, and maybe one that we haven't talked about yet is social and emotional learning, wellness, and mental health, which, boy, this is something that I think probably all of us are worried about right now with our kids and families in the, you know, with dealing with the isolation and all that's going on right now. Just a lot for folks to handle. But what I fear is that often when we get into these financial tough times, right? We're in California. Everybody's talking about, you know, 7 to 10% cuts, and those are very real conversations that everybody's going to be dealing with, and I'm sure it's not just in California. But this is the time when people make decisions about what they're going to cut, and if we're already worried about the level of science, the level of history, social science, the level of support around wellness and social and emotional learning and mental health, those are often the first things that are on the chopping block when these budget tough times hit. And that really worries me right now, because I do feel like we had made some shifts. We've focused a lot on SEL and on mental health and wellness here in Sacramento. We're committed to it. It's not going anywhere here. But I do worry about it just kind of more broadly. So I wanted to put that out there. I do, for those of you that have, you know, you've got connections to those purse strings, hold on to these supports that are so needed right now, and maybe more needed than ever.
I would also add, don't forget about arts, music. It's
Yep.
really critical. That's been one of the most, I mean, I honestly attribute our academic success in our district to the long-standing music and art program that we have. It has never been cut through all of these crazy times. Art and music is really important for kids.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. We'll have to end there. If we could go to the last slide, please. This was a really amazing panel. And again, they all volunteered their time. And people I, respected, admired, and very excited to have you all here. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for the audience questions. I'm sorry if we didn't get to some of yours. We will take a 15-minute break, and then we'll have our closing session with Andy Porter and Linda Darling-Hammond, my future boss, in 2 weeks. We'll begin at 1:30 p.m. If you haven't already registered to join, you can get your unique link at ccl2020.org/sessions. And if you have a prior obligation, this will all be made available on our website along with all of our publications. So thank you so much again for taking your time, and I hope you're all staying safe and healthy. Thank you again. Bye.